Just ahead on Money in Your Pocket, we're talking credit cards with Extension educator Kathy Sweedler. We'll be discussing common credit card terms, how to choose a credit card, and how your credit score is impacted by your use of plastic. Kathy will also provide us with some great advice on paying down credit card debt and how to obtain credit if you don't have a credit history. That's all coming up next, so don't go away.
This program is made possible in part by Credit Union One. Proud to support Money in Your Pocket. Credit Union One offers savings and lending options. Additional information on membership available at creditunionone.org. Loans subject to approval. Accounts are insured up to $250,000. By member's choice, this institution is not federally insured.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Money in Your Pocket. I'm Lori Banks, and today we're talking about something that a lot of us can relate to, and that's credit cards. And I'm happy to welcome back Kathy Sweedler, U of I Extension educator. Thanks for coming by.
Thank you for having me.
All right, I know that credit cards is one of the things that you give public talks to and educate people on, right?
That's right. We do talk about credit a fair amount.
All right, well, the first question I had was, do we really need a credit card to get by in today's world?
You know, that is an excellent question. A lot of us that are maybe of a certain age see credit cards as a financial tool, a way to kind of facilitate purchasing that makes it easier at times, a way to build our credit ratings and our credit history. And, you know, especially for things like travel, they can be really handy. It can be kind of a challenge sometimes to make plane reservations, car rentals, and things if you don't have a credit card. But there are other people, especially some of the younger adults, who really are making conscious decisions to not have any kind of a credit card, and they've worked their lives in a way where that works for them.
And what do you think, we always think, you know, of young people, you know, used to getting credit cards in college and living off of credit. You said there's now a new generation of these younger people that are saying, I don't want credit.
That's right. One, it's harder for younger people to get credit now than it was. And there is a Credit Card Act of 2009 that kind of rolled into effect. And one piece of it says that if you're under 21, that you can't get a credit card unless a parent or a guardian co-signs, or you can prove the capacity to pay, which typically means that you have like a job that's paying a regular salary, which, you know, for many college students that wouldn't fit in. So we're seeing, and also credit card companies can't come onto college campuses and set up booths and promote cards that way. So we're seeing that many more young adults really don't have credit cards, either because they can't get one or because they choose not to.
So one of the arguments for a credit card is, well, it helps build your credit score. You can't build a credit score if you don't have a credit card. Is that true?
You can build a credit score without, and a credit history without a credit card, but it's definitely harder. And so, you know, there are, you know, if you have, for example, if you have a student loan and you make payments on it, that would probably go into your credit report. There's movement in the industry to try to encourage more people's landlords from renting or utility companies or cell phone companies to report that to the credit history so that people can build up their credit history without using a credit card. But all that said, I still think the easiest way to probably do it is by having a credit card that you make regular payments on time, and that would probably be the fastest way to build your credit history.
All right, I do have a quick question. What is the difference between a credit card and a debit card?
Yeah, let's talk about that.
They're both plastic, and sometimes they have a little Visa symbol on, but they're different.
They work really different. And kind of going back to that credit history, using your debit card will not affect your credit history positively or negatively. It just never gets reported. Your debit card is really designed just to pull money directly out of one of your financial accounts, like your checking account. And it happens right away. You use your debit card, that money will come out immediately. You need to make sure that you've got the money there. A credit card lets you take out a loan. A credit card means that you are purchasing something now with the promise that you'll pay it off later. Hopefully at the end of when you get that bill, that you'll be able to make that payment in full. So it's a form of a loan, and then and that's why it does get reported to your credit report and history.
Okay. So if we are shopping for credit cards, and believe me, you can do that online. There's lots of websites that will compare and contrast. What advice do you have for people if you are shopping for a credit card? What should you look for?
Well, I think the first thing is you need to think about, how will I use this credit card? What am I getting it for? And what's my money personality? How do I use these things? Because what we want to do is we want to make this a financial tool that doesn't cost us a lot. And that's really kind of the downside of a credit card, is if you're not using it wisely, you can have a lot of interest charges. You do have the option when you get that bill to not pay it all off, just to pay what they call a minimum payment, and then roll over or have this revolving credit balance, and that's when it gets expensive. So number one, if you're looking for something and you're the kind of person where you know, well, most of the time I'm going to be able to pay it off, but maybe I work seasonally and there's going to be 2 or 3 months where I'm going to kind of need to roll that money over and I'm going to pay the interest charges, then you're going to want to look for something that has a really low interest rate, a low APR, annual percentage rate, so that you don't have such high costs with that. Now, if you're a person who says, well, I always pay my bill on time, I use it for convenience, I pay it off in full, you're not going to be as concerned about that, but you want to make sure that you maybe want to pay more attention to like the annual fee or other fees that are involved in that. So those are you need to definitely look at the costs. You need to look at the interest rate, and you need to look at other fees that are like if late payment fees, annual fees, those things.
All right, so as we're looking for credit cards, there's often several terms that come up that are associated with pretty much all credit cards. Can you run us through what are the common ones and what do they mean?
I think the things that we need to think about is that annual percentage rate, which is really a way of taking all the different costs of that card, not like late fees and things, but typical costs like the interest rate, and it gives you a way to compare different credit cards. So you want the lowest APR you can find. Other things that come into mind would be like that late fee. Okay, so that's a term. If you're a kind of person that every once in a while you just forget and you don't get your bills paid on time, then you're going to have a late fee, and you're going to want to compare those. The grace period is really, after you get, you charge things, how long till that bill's going to arrive, and what's that time period? That can be really tricky. So if it's, some of them are much shorter than others. And so if you're paid, say, monthly, that might be an issue if that grace period is really more like 3 weeks and it comes around off cycle for you. So there's another thing to consider. Interesting enough, the industry has a lot of different ways of charging for things, so you always want to look at the agreements and make sure there's nothing else in there that would take you by surprise.
I think when you talk about fees, there's always, late fee, annual fee, and balance transfer fee.
Yeah, balance transfer fee. That one also that's when you might take all the debt that you've accumulated on a credit card, if that's happened, and roll it over to another one. And then companies are trying to encourage you to use their credit card because they anticipate making money that way. And so they might give you some sort of a break to get you over there. So they might, depending on what that fee is, they might be at different amounts. They might waive interest rates for a bit, but you want to really look closely at those agreements. So maybe what they're advertising as the interest rate has a finite amount of time and it will bounce up. So you want to really keep those in mind. That can be a real challenge to be able to do that effectively and still stay on top of your bills.
So read the fine print, which often we get those statements and then there's all this language and we just kind of don't, read the fine print.
Yes, you're making a contractual agreement, you need to know what you're getting into.
All right, so we see lots of ads on TV, lots of ads online for different credit cards that offer rewards and points and bonuses and trips here or there. How do you pick which one is going to work for you?
So perks are just very appealing to people. And, sometimes you can really make those work for you. So if you're a person that has had experience using credit or paying bills and you do that on time and you're not worried about being sort of drawn in, like, oh, I got to go buy a lot of this in order to get my perks, then I think there's something to look at those and to see what you can get. So things like miles, my family travels a lot, so we like to have a credit card that gives us miles to travel. That typically pays for us. Other people are more interested in getting, that 5% back on daily living expenses, so things like groceries and clothing and things like that. So yeah, I think you can shop around for that. None of these things come for free.
No, they don't.
So, there's usually a higher annual fee for something with a perk card. This is a generalization, but still as a trend. So you want to make sure that the perks that you're getting back is going to pay more than that annual fee.
Okay, Kathy, let's talk about that minimum payment, because when you get your statement, you'll see, oh, I only need to pay $35. Well, you can kind of fall into a dangerous trap if you're only paying the minimum.
That's right. So that minimum payment is really to the advantage of the credit card company. It's not to the advantage of the consumer. And so you really want to try to pay more than that. I mean, ultimately, you want to try to pay it all off. But even if you can't, you want to pay more. And so let me just give you an example.
Okay.
Let's say that a person had a $3,000 balance, and the minimum payment was $90, and they only paid that minimum payment. And they didn't charge anything else on the credit card, so we're stuck with that $3,000. It would take them 11 years to pay it off, and they would pay a total of $4,745.
Wow.
Okay. Now, if they could just find $13 more a month and pay $103 instead of that $90, they'd have it paid off in 3 years, and they would save over $1,000 in interest. So when you see that minimum payment, that's a set point that the credit card companies are handing you, and they're saying, this is what you need to pay. But if you can even just pay a little bit more than that, it will really be helpful.
Okay, talk about this calculator online. It's powerpay.org.
That's right. It's from Utah State Extension, and it's a really wonderful online calculator. It lets you go in, you log in, and then you can put in all the different debts that you might have, whether they're student loans or auto loans or credit cards. And you put in, your APR and your minimum monthly payment, and then you can run all kinds of calculations. You can look at what happens if I only pay minimum payment. How will it pay off? What if I add $20 more a month to that overall payment piece? How would that affect things? And so just with a click of a button, you'll get these new numbers. The other thing that it can let you do is, let's say that you had 3 different debts, and total you were paying $150 towards credit cards. What if, when you paid off one, instead of lowering the amount you're paying to all your debts, you continued with $150, but now you put it towards just those 2 instead of the third. And you continue that when you paid off the second one, and you continue that $150, and you're power paying down that final debt. You will really have a huge impact on how long it takes you to pay it. And so we really encourage you to try that button too, to see what it would be if you just kept that same amount coming out of your budget towards your debt, even as you pay them off.
And then eventually you'll get rid of it, and you'll have an extra $150 to put towards retirement.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to hear.
I wanted you to talk about timing of payments.
Sometimes we kind of get into these messes where when our bill comes is not a great time in terms of when we're receiving our paycheck, and that's why we're late on payments. Being late on a payment usually means we have a really high late fee, and then more interest accumulates, so it's a bad thing financially. You can often call a lender, whether it's a credit card company or auto lender, and just say, could we move the date? Could we do it so it's right after my paycheck, and I would have that cash on hand to pay it? And that's just sort of a really simple way to take care of what can be a big issue.
Yeah, when you think about it, you're paying more interest, late fee, and if you're late a lot, it's going to go on your credit report.
That's right.
So simple as calling. Everybody may not go for it, but it's worth a call, I would think.
Exactly. I can't guarantee it, but the feedback I get from people is that it often works.
Okay. What if someone doesn't have the greatest credit rating, yet they need a credit card? What can they do?
Right, and sometimes it's not even they don't have a great credit rating, they just don't have a credit history. One thing you can do is get a secured credit card. And what that is you go through a financial institution and you ask them for it, and you will put up money as collateral. So let's say you might put down $500, and it'll go into an account that pays some interest. And then they would give you a credit card with like a $500 limit. And but then it will work just like a regular credit card. You can use it anywhere you could use credit up to that $500 limit. And then as your credit history improves, you can go back to that financial institution and get a different kind of credit card. But it's a really easy and great way to build up your credit credit history.
If we've got parents watching and maybe they do want to establish a credit history for their, teenager or college student, and maybe they want to get them a credit card so they can also learn about credit, because it's a good thing to learn, what would you recommend for parents?
Well, I think this is one of those things where we have to make a decision if we want to co-sign on a credit card or a student loan. And that's a big decision, because then you're not only dealing with your young adult's credit history, but you're dealing with your credit history. Because anything that happens on that will affect both equally. When you co-sign on a loan, it's like you both have full responsibility for that loan. So that's something you first need to decide if that's what you want to do or not. A secured credit card, where you would put maybe that money up front for them, but it was all in their name, then you don't have your credit history on the line. So that's one option to consider. And I think, so it also just depends on what you have the family means to do, what you can help them with. Student loans, one of the things about those is you don't have to have a credit history to get like a federal backed student loan. And that, can be a way to start that process, as long as you have a plan in place for how that's going to be paid back.
Do you think it's, as an extension educator, do you think it's good to teach your kids about credit and the pitfalls and the upside of having credit?
Personally, yes. I think communicating about all these different financial tools is critical, and you, as a parent, typically have more experience, and so you ought to share your experiences, both those that weren't so positive as well as those that were positive, and then you can have some communication about what your own personal family's values are related to credit, and then listen to what your young adult has to say about their values, because they might be different, and then work together about how you're going to facilitate whether or not you're going to use the financial tool of credit.
I wanted to jump back a little bit. We didn't really talk so much about store credit cards, which are different. I mean, as we've been talking, we're referring to the traditional Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover. What about store credit cards from department stores? What do we need to know?
I think the thing you have to keep in mind is that credit cards can be very useful in terms of convenience and things. And building credit history. But the disadvantage is that it might lead to impulse spending. You might end up purchasing more than you really want or need. And that's a definite disadvantage. And so when you're in a store and they have one of these, well, if you want to buy that today, we'll give you a credit card and you'll get 10% off. That can lead to, you have to be careful that you're not getting kind of pulled into making a purchase you wouldn't have purchased otherwise. And then later on think, oh, that's more than I can afford, or how am I going to pay that off? And you also have to think about, if you are paying it off over time, what's the real cost of it when you've added in those interest charges? And did you really win with that 10% discount?
Yeah.
So I think the problem with that I would just be concerned about with the store cards is, why are you getting it?
Is it enticing you to buy more?
Right.
I mean, it is. It's an easy trap to get into, because you think, oh, well, I don't have to pay this off until next month, so maybe I will buy another $50 worth of something that normally I wouldn't have.
The other thing is that really, I kind of come back to that, making those payments on time. Making your payments on time is the biggest factor in your credit history. The more credit cards that you have, the harder it is to keep track of. That just makes sense, right? And so it's easier for something to slip by and not to get paid. I remember the main bills that I pay every month. But if there's a credit card from a department store that I only occasionally use, or a different kind of store, then I might not remember that I should have to pay that month, and it could get buried somewhere and it could get missed. So I think that's another issue.
Does the amount of credit cards, open credit cards that you have, negatively affect your credit score?
It's definitely a variable in your credit score. So the amount of credit you have is one of the real things about whether you have the capacity to take on another loan. So let's say you went to get a car loan, they're going to say, look at how much other debt do you have out there, and really, if you have a credit card limit, you have the potential to walk out tomorrow and spend up to it. So yes, more open lines of credit definitely can have an effect.
Even if you're not using, say you opened up several store credit cards and you kind of forgot about them, but they have no balance but limits of $1,000. Did they take that all into account, the potential credit that you could charge up?
Yes, it's one of those things. There's different pieces here that affect the credit score in different ways. So definitely that limit is taken into account. But one of the things that's also taken into account is the length of history of credit. So if you've had a credit card for like 30 years, that is a plus. Now, if you immediately go and close all your credit cards that are old, you will see a hit on your credit score. Okay. Even though from a money management point of view, it makes sense in a way to like limit how many credit cards you have open, you'll see a decrease. So that will probably shift back up within a few months. But if you're thinking that you're going to need to go out and apply for a loan, in the next few weeks, and you want to think carefully about which cards you're closing and how you're managing that.
And we've mentioned several times on the show, you should check your credit report often to see, you may have a lot of stuff open that, oh my gosh, I forgot about that.
That's right.
Yeah. So keep that in mind.
And everybody can check their credit report from each of the 3 bureaus once a year for free at annualcreditreport.com.
Yeah.
And that is safe to do online.
Okay. I wanted to talk a little bit about, we've kind of talked about the upsides and the downsides. I want to talk about first the upsides of having a credit card.
Well, the way the world works today, it's really easy to give a credit card to pay for something. It's very convenient. It can give you a nice record of where your purchases are, in the sense that you can look back over that and see where you've been making purchases. So I think convenience, and then of course it also lets you, in a way, spread out your spending if there's a reason that you need to do that, if you're not going to be paying everything else off. But I think the main thing that people like is the convenience.
So what about the downsides?
The downsides are, that it can grow, that you can end up living with a revolving balance that never gets paid off. And that is a huge expense if you think about it over a lifespan. So instead of being able to put money towards savings and having that in retirement, instead you're paying the credit card companies huge amounts of interest and you're losing all that money. So having an ongoing revolving balance is a really bad habit.
All right. So what advice do you have for someone that feels like, oh, goodness, I am kind of drowning in a little bit of credit card debt or a lot? What should be the first thing they should do?
Well, this is a really hard thing. And so I think the first thing is really to make a list of all your different debts and exactly what you owe and what the minimum payments are, and take a look at that. And that's where that PowerPay calculator can really help you kind of do that too, or you can do it on a piece of paper, whatever. And then, make a commitment to yourself. How are you going to pay this down? What's your plan for it? You can also, get help from a credit counselor, and that's not a bad thing to reach out for that, but it'll be a matter of still paying down those debts. How are you going to do that? Yeah. So I think it's really kind of get a handle on it. And sometimes it's just very hard to face up to what that is. So I find writing it down where you've got it in black and white and coming up with a plan can provide a lot of relief. And I've heard many persons tell me that once they did it and they, for example, did it in PowerPay and they printed out the schedule, it just gave them a sense of relief because they could say, oh, in 2 years and so many months, I'll be done with this. And knowing that was really helpful.
Yeah. That's some great advice. I wanted to throw in too, we had Julie Volling from AARP was on the show a while ago, and we talked about fraud and scams, and the advice she said is those credit card offers that you get in the mail, shred them. And she often advised too, instead of having your bill sent to you, have it sent online, because people can take that out of the mail and then they have access to so not saying that there's another downside, but there is. When you have credit cards and things in your name, that's just another way for people to hack into your information.
Yeah, I think it's something we need to be aware of, and it's another advantage of checking your credit reports online, or by mail if you prefer to do it that way, is that you can see what credit is open in your name. If somebody opens up an account in your name as identity theft, they're not going to mail that bill to your house. No. They're going to have it sent somewhere else and then just not pay it. So if you look at that and you see accounts that aren't yours, that you're not familiar with, you really need to pursue that and figure out what's going on.
So, Kathy, we're all out of time. Thank you for giving us some great advice on using credit wisely and making it work to our advantage.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. When it comes to credit cards, here are a few points to remember. Credit cards are a tool. They can help you or hurt you depending on how you use them. Read the fine print and look at the details regarding grace period, fees and interest rates. When choosing credit cards based on rewards, points, or discounts, they can be helpful, but they're never free. Finally, think about the true cost of using credit. Depending on how you use it, that item you purchase may end up costing you twice as much as what you paid for it. And that's our program for this week. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time for Money in Your Pocket.
This program is made possible in part by Credit Union One, proud to support money in your pocket. Credit Union One offers savings and lending options. Additional information on membership available at creditunion1.org. Loans subject to approval. Accounts are insured up to $250,000. By Members' Choice, this institution is not federally insured.